My name is Luke Rappaport, and I'm a second-year master's student at the McCourt School studying energy policy. I'm the president of the McCourt Energy and Environment and Student Association at Georgetown. We are a graduate student group that engages students, academics, and practitioners on policy issues related to energy and the environment. I am honored to introduce Senator Michael Bennet, our first participant of the day, to the stage. Senator Bennet is a senior United States Senator from Colorado since 2009. Before his appointment to the Senate, Senator Bennet served as superintendent of the Denver Public Schools. Before going to work for the city of Denver, he served as managing director of the Anschutz Investment Company, and prior to that, he was an attorney with a major international law firm and served in the U.S. Department of Justice. Please join me in welcoming Senator Michael Bennet to the stage.
Thanks.
How are you doing, Senator?
Good. How are you?
Good to have you. Have a seat.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Good morning, everybody.
So first, I want to start with your thinking about the problem of the climate, and specifically talk us through your own kind of either personal, emotional, intellectual journey for realizing the urgency and acuity of the problem.
I think of it both as a problem for our planet and as an unbelievable challenge for our democracy. And it's been the 10 years that I've been in the Senate that I've really come to believe that it's urgent, as you described it. In my home state of Colorado, we are racked by the effects of climate change. We see it in the fire season that no longer is a season but lasts all year long. We see it in the perennial droughts that are threatening our farmers and ranchers from being able to pass their farms and ranches on to their kids and to their grandkids, which is frankly all they really care about. We see it in the shorter ski seasons that we have and the attack on our economy. We see it in the beetle kill, the trees that all over the forests in my state that have been killed. But I want to add one thing, because I hear people all the time say on the campaign trail, we need to act urgently. And I totally agree with that. But it's not enough. We need a durable solution. We need a solution that will endure. And if we accept the political system, like the one that McConnell has devised and the one that Trump has inherited, where you either get nothing done or you get something done and then 2 years later the other side just rips it out, you can't solve climate change. Climate change is a matter for a generation, and we should stop lying to the next generation about what's required here. We have to build a durable coalition of Americans all over this country, a constituency for change, if we have any hope of closing over a broken Washington, D.C. and actually solving climate change, for actually providing the leadership that I think this democracy can provide on climate.
So I want to zoom in on both those points. First, let's talk about the effects that you're discussing. Does that create? It's striking to me that you're starting to see actual lobbying. Like you've got crab fishermen in California who are part of a lawsuit, right, against a big oil.
Right.
Do you get, just as a senator, right, who's got constituents who say, look, this is, are the ski folks of Colorado coming to you?
Absolutely.
They see it as a threat.
Absolutely. There's an incredible group of sportsmen and women called Protect Our Winners, POW. And
oh, really? Protect Our Winners?
Protect Our Winners, POW. They're some of the most amazing climate advocates in the country. And for them, it's not just about, it's not some metaphysical idea out there. It is their avocation, it is their vocation, it is their livelihood, it is their culture. It's everything, it's their lives. And they are incredible advocates. And the others that you talk about, this is how a democracy is supposed to work. It is Americans coming together in a coalition. It's an unusual coalition. That's how you create durability, I think. And what we can't ever do again is lose an economic argument to a climate denier, which is what happened the last time. There should never be another climate denier in the White House. Donald Trump should be the last climate denier we ever see. On moral terms, yes, but on political terms, he should never have won that economic argument, and he did, and we can't put ourselves in that position again.
So when you talk about the politics, and we're talking about like why are we here at this part, What is your understanding? You talked about sort of McConnellism, right? The way that the Senate is currently ruled.
Right.
Which is the underlying context for all of this. What is your understanding of how that's contributed to stopping action on climate? Waxman-Markey was there when you first entered the Senate, and how do you fix that?
I think fundamentally, he and Trump and the Koch brothers and others, but those guys principally, have prosecuted a political argument, and they've succeeded at it for the moment, that says that Democrats and environmentalists and climate change people are anti-jobs, that we're anti-worker, and that we're anti-infrastructure. And I don't happen to think any of those things are true, but I do think that they have been successful in making the argument, which has been made it hard for us to win seats in unusual states, that we have to win if we're going to overcome them. My perspective is a little different from the other people in this race, because I've won 2 tough elections in the swing state of Colorado. That's a purple state. And I know for us to be able to overcome McConnellism, we're going to have to win in Colorado. We're going to have to win in Iowa. We're going to have to win in Arizona and New Hampshire and North Carolina. There's not a shortcut. That's what we're going to have to do. And my view is, I'm with Greta on this. It can be no compromise on the science. None. No compromise on the science. But we have to produce a set of policy choices for the American people that can allow us to win these races and build, as I said earlier, an enduring constituency to support the work that has to be done.
So let's talk about the science. What is your understanding, as you think about the problem, of what basically the IPCC's latest findings mean for the planet and what U.S. action has to be?
I think that we have a huge, unbelievably urgent existential problem on our hands. And we have lots of problems on our hands, and this generation of Americans has a lot to be really angry at us about. But I think that the reason they're so angry about climate is, unlike all the other stuff we're doing to them, like forcing them to spend 25 years paying back their debt for school and forcing them to inherit a national debt that they did nothing to incur. On climate, the reason it's different is they're paying attention to the science, and what they're saying is, if we don't begin to address it, if we don't get our heads out of whatever it is where our heads are, that there may not be anything left for them to do, because they're looking at the science. And I agree with that. I mean, I think that what the IPCC report makes clear is that, you know, we've got to limit warming to 1.5 degrees of Celsius. We got to get to net zero carbon by 2050, if not before that. And in the American context, as you said, I mean, one of the things that I've proposed in my climate plan, straight out of that report, is the need to use the working lands of the United States to sequester carbon. Because 30%, even today, 30% of the carbon we have is sequestered in our lands and in our forests and in our oceans. And that hasn't even been part of the political conversation yet. But I saw that in the science, and I said, you know what? That has the potential to begin to build a coalition with farmers and ranchers in this country, not going to be easy, to create durable policy on climate change.
So I want to get into some of the solutions you propose in your climate plan. Before we get there, it seems to me that there's 2 ways of thinking about climate. As a problem or as the problem. That there are some people who just say, look, this is essentially the constitutive struggle of civilization at this moment. That in a definitional sense, everything that happens within the climate, right?
Right. Yeah.
And there are others who say climate is a challenge, and there are many challenges. We have high healthcare costs, and this is one of many challenges. Which is it for you? Like, is this the number one challenge?
I actually would say, for the reasons that I just said, that the next generation isn't going to be able to fix it if we leave it to them, that I think that categorizes it as the challenge. And for our country, that presents 2 other enormous challenges. One is, how do we transition our economy in a way that gives the American people confidence that we're not going to destroy it on the way to dealing with climate change? And I am completely confident that we can do that. In other words, the idea that we've got somebody in the White House who claimed that sticking your head in the sand on climate was good for our economy, while contending with climate was bad for the economy, is absurd to the point. I mean, it's just absurd. And we should win that. But as I said earlier, the other test, and I think this is a test that's not well understood by some of the candidates in the race and has not been well debated, is our democracy up to this task? And that is a really non-trivial question, because
I mean, it clearly isn't right now.
So far, we have not. We haven't been. And when you lose a national race, as we did in 2016, to a climate denier, that creates a real concern, because you can't act urgently on climate if you have a climate denier in the White House.
But wait a second. I want to make sure I understand this, because to me, the point that you're making is a crucial one, right? The Democratic structural impediments to big change on the level necessary to deal with the climate crisis are prior to the specific solutions to what we will do. Okay?
Exactly. So much better said. That's the point that I'm trying to.
So my question though about that is like, what at that layer, what I hear from you is one of the ways to fix that is persuasion. We have to make a better case, and if we make better cases, we can win in places. But it seems like there's a deeper structural problem, whether that happens to be with special interests and big oil, or whether it has to do with the erosion of norms, or it has to do partisan polarization. Like,
totally.
What is your vision? Like, President Michael Bennet has a Republican Senate.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
President Michael Bennet has a Republican Senate, and Mitch McConnell's still there because he wins re-election.
Yes.
Now
so
what?
First of all, we got to try not to have a Republican Senate.
Okay. Yes.
We got to try, and it can't be an afterthought.
No,
it can't. When you run a race in Colorado, just for anybody who's here who's from Colorado and wants to run for the Senate, let me tell you something. It's really important to say the same thing in the primary election that you say in the general election. The same thing in rural areas as in urban areas. It's critical. I may not win the Democratic nomination for president. I hope that I do. But if I lose, it's not going to be because I said one thing in one place and something somewhere else, because I think these issues are that important. These guys need to know something. Our democracy is broken. It is broken. And on this most important issue, the fact of our broken democracy creates the greatest challenge and the greatest burden. But I think a huge opportunity for all of you, because Chris is talking about huge structural issues. Let's just take one. The Republican Party used to have a fairly honorable environmental record. Richard Nixon created the EPA and signed into law the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act. Ronald Reagan closed the hole in the ozone layer. You guys probably don't even know what that is. He closed it with a cap and trade system. Both Bushes said, we need to do something on climate, and my friend John McCain ran on climate change. What changed? Why do we have a national political party in America that now denies that climate change is real, even though the evidence of it is profoundly more urgent today than when all those Republicans agreed with that? One thing, Citizens United in 2010, that gave the billionaires who were interested in doing it the ability to control Washington and to create what I call a corruption of inaction. The Supreme Court imagined this world of quid pro quo corruption, where Chris gives me $5,000 and I go hide that in my icebox and I write a bill for Chris. And they worried about the appearance of that. And so they said, okay, well, we should put a limit, we'll allow a limit on what Chris can give to me. But when it came to independent expenditures, they said, well, those are independent. They won't cause America to lose faith in our democracy. And so they allowed billionaires to give unlimited amounts of money. And guess what happens when you do that? All they have to do is rattle the change in their pocket. If we start talking about climate on Capitol Hill, and they say, really, Republican? Because if you do that, we'll invest $30 million, which is nothing to us, in your next primary. And ever since then, as a result, we can't even have a freaking conversation about climate change on the floor or in a. So when Greta says work harder, what she's saying is we all have to work harder to build a politics to overcome this special interest. It's not about changing a rule. It's not about whether we stay later on a day or have lunch together. It is about the structural issues in our democracy that are tearing our democracy apart, that have put a climate denier in the White House and somebody who doesn't believe in the rule of law, the separation of powers, or anything else this democracy has ever believed in. And that work is only going to happen if you do what needs to be done between now and Election Day 2020. That is the only way through it, is getting people to vote on this. They know better than that.
So if that's
So that's my theory.
Yeah, that's your theory. Well, I think it's a very persuasive theory. So we've got this sort of political obstacle. We've got the science bearing down on us, right? So
Right.
let's talk now about your vision for the plan, right? So I want obviously, to me and I think to you, the political obstacles are up front, right? I mean, that's the reality we live in. Push them aside for a second,
Yes.
and I want to talk about what you've envisioned, if you did have the legislative room to run, if you were the President of the United States, what the solutions would look like, and then we're going to come back around to what you can do with and without Congress.
So
if that makes sense.
what I've put out there is a plan that says, and in some ways it's the same as other plans, in some ways it's different. It's a plan that says we'll invest $1 trillion of public money to develop clean technologies, to leverage another $10 trillion of private sector resources. It talks about using the federal government to help people in this country export those technologies so that we are leading the world, not China, on renewable energies. It talks about creating 10 million clean energy jobs over the next 10 years. Reducing by 50% the emissions from our built environment, 50% the emissions of our transportation environment, our transportation sector by 2030, both of which are critical for us to get this job done. Importantly, it engages every American in something called Climate X. So I say, look, every American should be able to buy 100% renewable energy if they want to buy 100% renewable energy, and every single provider of electrons should therefore be required to provide that. Every single car manufacturer, I say, should provide an electronic vehicle. And for people that are living in poverty, you know, what we historically have done is said to them, listen, we'll subsidize your home heating oil, which doesn't exactly help on the climate stuff.
No.
What would be a better idea would be to subsidize their retrofitting of their apartments and their houses to be able to make them more energy efficient. The big place where there's a difference here, or a distinction, is on this issue of conservation. The idea that, you know, that what the international folks tell us is that we need 30% of our planet to be able to sequester the carbon we need to sequester in order to meet the scientific goals that we have. And so I've said, look, as the United States, let's lead on that question. You know, let's build a coalition of conservation folks and farmers and ranchers and other people that are concerned about our water and our land, and frankly get to a point where we're actually paying people to sequester carbon in their soil. And I started that work already as a member of the Agriculture Committee in the last Farm Bill. It's not easy to do because, you know, the political fault lines are kind of drawn in a certain way. But it's my belief that those fault lines are drawn to benefit McConnell's politics, Trump's politics, and the Koch brothers' politics.
So you talk about this conservation idea, with it, which is interesting, comes from the IPCC report,
Right.
mandating 30% conservation, right? It would be a federal mandate, right? I mean, you would have to figure out, the federal government would figure out where the land is, but
it'd be a combination of things. So you're setting aside the land, but you're also incentivizing people that are working the land to engage in practices. I mean, we've done this historically for soil conservation, engaging practices that will keep carbon in the soil. As I mentioned earlier, even without paying attention to it, our working lands are sequestering 30% of the carbon that we put up in the atmosphere. So there's a real opportunity there. Also, forests, you know, are a very important thing for us to do to help with all this. So I just see it as an opportunity to broaden the conversation and make it hopefully more stable.
One way to think about all this, right, is sort of carrots and sticks, right? So there's investment on one side, right? You want to create the conditions for alternatives, and I think the Climate X idea is an interesting way of mandating gently, right? So you're telling the utilities that you have to, but it's still opt-in, right? So the mandate comes to the utility. The utility has to provide this. The customer makes the choice. My question to you is, there is not a carbon fee in here.
You're right.
is there enough of sticks to get things to where they have to be?
I think, look, I support putting a price on carbon. I do, and I think that it is a very efficient way for us to deal with this. But I don't think it's the only way for us to deal with this, and I don't think it's going to happen in the near term, which is why most of the candidates haven't put it in there. It's because there's opposition from both sides. Frankly, there's a concern, the obvious concern from the right, and then there's now a sort of concern from the left about whether that's going to burden, people that are already stretched in this economy.
Congratulations, poor person, your energy just went up.
Now, I think we could design it in a way that didn't do that. And I believe over time we can convince people of that. But I didn't put it in there because I don't want to I believe the problem is so urgent that if we could invest $10 trillion over the next 8 years or decade in this, we should do it, whether we've done the price on carbon or whether we haven't.
I want to quickly talk about another idea that you have in here called a climate bank, which I thought is interesting, which seems to me like both it could be promising or just like completely corrupt, depending on how it was run.
That's true. That is true. Guess what? It's all in the implementation.
Yes, that's right.
You are totally right. And that's
what is the climate bank?
If we had a longer conversation, we'd be able to. The climate plan is the mechanism for being able to invest that money that I talked about so that we can drive the clean energy economy here in the United States and lead the world in terms of climate energy economies. If you look at our companies in the United States and you ask which ones are actually paying a decent salary, which ones are actually have decent benefits like healthcare and other stuff, they tend to be companies that are exporting. And I think there's a real opportunity here for us to create an entirely new industry that is exporting and also paying people a decent wage and decent benefits, which, by the way, that goes to another issue here in terms of how do we build this coalition. There's a lot of skepticism among parts of organized labor that the jobs that are going to replace the existing fossil fuel jobs aren't going to be as high paying, aren't be as good. That's a reasonable skepticism for people to have, and we can't just ignore it. We have to engage with them and develop policies that make sure that, for example, every single wind project in Illinois, every single one of them has been built by union labor. That's not been true in Colorado, and it's not been true in lots of other states, but it sure would be better if we did that across the country than if we didn't. And I think it would move us to that more urgent solution faster.
There is, I noticed, a sort of Davis-Bacon prevailing wage stipulation in your plan.
That's the reason why. So, thank you for reading my plan.
It's my job.
I know, but it feels like that's a lot of plans that you're going to have to read.
So let's talk now about the kind of what a president can do. One of the things, so here's I'm going to give you a sort of metaphor or an analogy, I guess, and I want to hear your. So Donald Trump, it was very clear that he was obsessed with immigration. He campaigned on immigration. He had a lot of, I think, to my mind, bad ideas about immigration, but they were there. They were out there, and it has been clear that he has used basically everything he can do throughout the government.
Right.
I think because of Stephen Miller, to try to bring that about. He's run roughshod over Congress. He's moving money out of a middle school in Kentucky to build his wall. He's constantly massaging and manipulating and forcing the political bureaucracy to make life miserable for immigrants and to push on that. My question is, what is the climate version of that? Like, what is the 180 degrees good version of having that kind of single-minded focus look like when you're president?
So first of all, I want you to know I put my climate plan out. It was the first climate plan out there. And I was a school superintendent. I could have put an education plan out. I didn't. I put a climate plan out because I think it's that important an issue. And there are lots of smart people in this race for president, and they have lots of good plans. But to get to your earlier point, if you can't actually implement your plan is meaningless. I mean, I'm not going to say it's bad as being a climate denier, but it is meaningless in terms of actually solving the problem, which means that we have to overcome this broken DC, which I mentioned earlier. So the exact 180 degrees, 100 degrees off of Trump, it is in my plan, and it is a commitment that if in 9 months the Congress has not acted on climate, I will use every executive order or executive power available to the president through the Clean Air Act, and I think they're substantial, to be able to begin to address the climate issues we have in the transportation sector, in the power plant sector, and other kinds of things. I will do that. That is, in my mind, and you're going to have other people come here today and tell you they'll do it too. I want to tell you this. It's not an ideal way for a democracy to work. Because I hope that, look, I have written a bill already that overturns every single anti-climate thing that Trump has done. Every single one. And I got more than 30 Democrats on it, and we're going to be able to do that if we win.
Right, this is the durability issue.
This is the durability issue. We have to move past this broken democracy that we have, and I don't want to go back and retread that ground, but it's a reminder of how important it is.
Okay, but so my understanding of your sequencing is...
And I will go, by the way, and so, having done the executive stuff, I then will go out to every place in America, as Trump has done, and fight to sustain what I've done by executive order. Because if you don't do that, it will just be reversed, and then we'll be back to where we are.
So I just want to make sure I'm clear. Obviously, you would rejoin Paris immediately. Would you declare an emergency?
I would declare a public health emergency. I'd ask the public health agencies to declare an emergency on climate. Yes.
Would it be the first piece of domestic legislation that you would push on Congress to move?
What I've written in my plan is that I would, on the very first day, I would convene the people that I thought we needed to convene from around the country to begin to actually draft the legislative plan. On the way to doing that, so I gave us that 9-month window that I talked about. On the way to doing that, there's other legislation that I think is really important. Going after Citizens United, ending political gerrymandering in this country, banning members of Congress from ever becoming lobbyists, making sure that people are actually able to exercise their right to vote. I mean, I think there's a really important set of reforms. I'm not saying the climate stuff is contingent on that,
right.
but to be direct and honest about this, I think there's other pieces of work that are important.
Right, so I just want to be clear on the timeline and the prioritization here. To you, the sort of package of structural reforms, which is rebuilding parts of the broken democracy, is probably the first piece of legislation while the climate gets worked out through this council.
Through this council, and then we're done in 9 months. And by the way, I also call for the appointment of a group of people your age to be advising the president, hopefully me, during that 9-month period, so that we're actually meeting your expectations.
What about when we're just about to get to questions, so if folks have questions, they should be thinking about them, and I think we're screening them, and we got people at watch parties.
You don't need to screen them, I'll take them.
The question of fossil fuel extraction on public land, which is a very potent one because it is a place where, again, there is pretty wide latitude in the executive. Would you essentially stop renewing leases for public fossil fuel extraction on public land?
I wouldn't essentially stop it. I think there are places, my state, come visit my state, there are places where you would never want anybody to drill anything, and I've protected those the 10 years that I've been in the Senate. The Thompson Divide comes into mind outside of Glenwood Springs. There are other places where I don't feel as strongly about it, but where I have been focused, and it's in my plan, is making it much easier on public lands to set up renewables than we do today, so that we can actually focus on building those businesses.
But you see a space for continued fossil fuel extraction on public lands for how long?
I think that if it is extracted properly, that natural gas has a role to play in the transition to renewables, and I would say as soon as possible. I don't know what the answer is. And I want to be clear about it too. If Donald Trump's rules of stripping our regulations on capturing fugitive methane stands, that's going to make it a lot harder for me to view this as a useful transition, because if you're not capturing the fugitive methane, then it's not half as clean as coal anymore, it's as dirty as coal.
Yep.
And we need to be aware of how all of these different things kind of intersect and work together.
All right, let's go to some student questions right here.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Izzy George. I'm studying international economics in the School of Foreign Service, and my question is, considering the disproportionate impact of climate change on communities of color and people of lower socioeconomic statuses, how do you plan to specifically uplift the groups that are currently and will continue to be affected the most by climate change?
Thank you. In every section of my plan, there is a section that relates directly to what you're asking about. And in the EPA, I call for setting up an office that would focus on communities that have been disadvantaged over many, many decades because of our environmental policies in this country. The poorer communities, the communities of color, among other things, face, I think it's a 34% higher rate of polluted air than anybody else, and that's just the beginning. Their neighborhoods are also the dumping grounds for toxic chemicals and toxic waste. And so what I call for is using some of that investment through the Green Bank and other things to make sure that those communities are engaged in this new energy economy, and to make sure that we are providing credits to people or other subsidies who are living in low-income housing in America, so they can retrofit their communities and their houses as well and be part of this as well. Which, by the way, is another important point in all this. This is not about somebody writing a plan in a test tube in Washington, D.C. that will never actually succeed. We need to engage every single American, rich and poor, in the work of making this transformation in our economy. And so I think that's why your question is such a critically important one.
Let me just follow up on that, because I think it's a really important question, because there's a trust issue, I think, in some of the implementation, which is that communities that have been underinvested have been promised things for a long time. And so I guess, what in your record should make frontline communities and marginal communities that are subjects of environmental injustice trust that you will be looking out for them?
I would say I am the only urban school superintendent who has ever run for president of the United States. And my school district was majority kids of color, and the vast majority of the kids in my city live in poverty. And I've spent time on every single block in every single neighborhood in my city, not working on the climate issue per se, but working on the incredible injustice that exists in our education system in this country. And as a result of the work, we still have massive achievement gaps in my district, which I'm deeply frustrated and worried about. But there was a study that came out just a month ago that said, by Stanford University, that said the kids in Denver are growing so much faster academically than the other kids in the state that it's as if they have 60 additional school days a year. The kids in Denver were behind every single person, every single district in the state when I took over as superintendent. Now, I'm not saying that's perfect, but I am saying that I believe that I came face to face with the kind of communities that you're talking about in a very meaningful, close quarter way that's different than what the other candidates in this race have in terms of experience, and I would apply that to the climate issue. You have to earn everybody's trust. You're right. I mean, one thing that I think we seem to be forging a little bit of a consensus on here is that implementation matters a lot. Plans matter less. With all respect to myself and Chris, the cable matters less. What you actually do on the ground in the communities that are affected is what really counts for something. By the way, whether you're talking about the communities you and I are just talking about now, or coal communities in this country that have, a set of related concerns that we need to address.
Yeah, and there's a similar trust issue there. Yeah. Next student question.
Hello, sir. My name is Carl Rode. I'm from George Washington University's Graduate School of Political Management. My question is, I've looked through your Climate X option and climate change proposal and noted that there isn't anything explicit when it comes to public transportation initiatives, even though the Department of Transportation notes that public transit has massively reduced greenhouse gas emissions overall. Will you address this need as president?
I will, and I will go back and see if it was an oversight, but I certainly believe in public transportation. I believe in public transit. I was involved in the building of the light rail system that we have in Denver, where we have eclipsed every single promise that we made about transit-oriented development and ridership and other kinds of things in congestion. So I will keep after it, and I appreciate very much the question. And thank you very much for traveling from that foreign country to Georgetown.
All right, I think we have a question from USC. We've got some folks at USC. Let's take a question from them.
Cool. Hi, my name is Jessica Doherty, and I'm a senior. I'm a senior at USC Annenberg in journalism, and you've mentioned a lot of domestic approaches to the climate change issue this morning, and I'm wondering more about your international approach. Would you have the U.S. rejoin the UN Paris Agreement, and if so, do you think there are any policies that it lacks that you would hope to implement?
Great question.
The question was, would I rejoin Paris, and is there anything that it lacks?
That Paris lacks, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we should be, based on the UN report, the 2% or the 2 degrees Celsius, you know, is too high a target. We should be at 1.5, and that is a change. I'd say also internationally, there's some other things that we need to pay attention to. One is the crazy effect of Donald Trump's insane trade war on this issue, because we are now in a world where Brazil is chopping down the rainforest in part to plant soybeans, to sell those soybeans to China, when we were supplying China with those soybeans, and we don't have a tropical rainforest here to chop down. We would be a heck of a lot better off from a climate perspective if we weren't engaged in that trade war and we were recapturing that supply chain for our soybeans, that market for our soybeans, so that, you know, Brazil wasn't doing what it's doing. I'm not saying it's only because of that, but that's part of what's going on here. And the other thing I'd say is there is a huge opportunity internationally for reforestation. When you think about the damage that's being done to forests all over the world, the wood is getting harvested and being sold to China for nothing. And for us to decide, you know what, we're actually going to go out there and pay local communities not to chop down the forest,
right,
but to protect the forest. I mean, I haven't done the math on that. Somebody here should do the math on that, but I guarantee you that it would be one of the cheapest investments that we could make to sequester carbon around the globe. And so I think that's another important international component.
One more follow-up on that. The green bank that's in the plan, I think there's a nod to it possibly also supporting international investment.
There is,
so it would not just be solely for domestic investment.
No, and that's partly to capture the export market that I talked about earlier, and partly to mitigate this kind of stuff. I mean, cooking stoves and reforestation.
All right, Mo.
Senator, we got questions from students all over the country via email. One of them came from Zena Precht Rodriguez, who is a student affiliated with the Sunrise Movement out of New York City. And Zena writes, Senator Bennet, in 2011, Hurricane Sandy flooded my city's subway system and brought down our electric system. We missed classes for over a week, and many of my friends were displaced from their schools. She goes on to say, it's been 7 years since Sandy, and we're getting closer and closer to the brink of ecological and societal collapse. And unless we end the filibuster, it'll be impossible to pass bold climate action through Congress. Why do you oppose eliminating the filibuster when my generation's future is the cost of inaction?
It's a great question. It goes back to the discussion we were having earlier, and I don't want to repeat that, but I will say that for all of you that are in this debate about the filibuster or not, let's be very clear about one thing. A basic threshold question is, do Democrats have a majority in the Senate? There is only one person in America with the capability of changing the filibuster rule, and his name is Mitch McConnell. And until we have the ability to make that decision, I'm not even sure why we're having the debate. I know why we're having the debate, but I don't want it to distract us from the work that we need to do,
a second.
which is winning these races.
But here's why we're having the debate. Just to sort of defend the question. The reason we're having the debate is because if the 60 vote threshold is the threshold, then the marginal improvement of the majority seems much less, which is to say, if you're saying, I need to go motivate people out there to go work in every Senate race so they can elect a Democratic Senate, and that majority is 51-52, the value of the 51-52 is greatly diminished that you're asking people to work for if it just is like, well, sorry, we can't get 60 votes, so no climate change
well,
for
you can't, yeah, that assumes a world where where you never have anybody on the other side who's anything but a climate denier.
That's the world we live in.
That is the world we live in today, because we've lost the political argument momentarily to climate deniers. And so my point is only that we have to win the political argument against climate deniers. And the majority of Republicans in my state believe climate change is real and we should do something about it. The other thing I'd say is, there is a reason why Donald Trump has now appointed more than twice as many judges as Barack Obama was able to appoint. And there is a reason that we are now faced with putting people on the bench who are unwilling to say whether Brown versus Board of Education is settled law. And that has to do with the fact that we have made that process into just a bitter partisan process. And I think that's terrible for the American people. Again, my basic theory is, I could be wrong, but my basic theory is if we go down McConnell's rat hole in terms of how this democracy is run, we're never going to be able to solve the problems that we're talking about. If we find a way to overcome this and win and begin to make progress again, we will be able to deal with climate and deal with the other things. I'm not saying I'm irrevocably opposed to getting rid of the filibuster. I'm just saying it doesn't matter until we have a majority.
Hi, my name is Erin Casey. I'm studying environmental biology in the college here at Georgetown, and I'm actually from Colorado, so I'm super excited that you're here today.
Thank you. Where are you from?
Denver.
Did you go to the Denver Public Schools?
I did not, but I know, sorry. I know a lot of people who did, though.
You
should have just lied.
I know, now I'm thinking of it.
No, you should have said, I was looking for better leadership.
Gotcha. I am really curious to know how you plan to balance pragmatism with big, bold plans such as the Green New Deal.
To me, they are hand in glove. I don't think you can call yourself progressive if you can't actually make progress. And because you and I come from a state that's exactly a third Democratic, a third Independent, and a third Republican, I don't get up in the morning expecting that everybody I know is going to agree with each other. In fact, this whole democracy we've forgotten this somehow, but the whole, what we now call a democracy, what they called a republic, was founded on the idea not that we would agree with each other, but that we would disagree with each other. And their theory was, out of those disagreements, we would create more durable and more imaginative solutions than any king or tyrant could come up with on their own. We have totally lost that in our national politics. You mentioned immigration earlier. The only place I've seen it in the 10 years I've been here was when I was part of the Gang of Eight that wrote the immigration bill in the Senate, where we got people's good ideas, we made it stronger. It couldn't pass because of the tyranny of the Hastert rule, which is an example of the minority doing what they were doing. So I don't think these things are in conflict. I guess the way I think of the balance is no compromise on the science. And then I'm interested to hear what people's ideas are for getting to the scientific goals that we have. I don't think writing it in the back room of a committee hearing in Washington, D.C., or on the back of a napkin in Washington, D.C., is the way we're going to get where we need to go. I think engaging the American people on their farms and ranches, in their businesses, and in their schools and neighborhoods is how we're going to build support for this.
But the science, just to follow up on that, and then we'll go to another question. But if the science is pretty clear that we have to basically stop fossil fuel extraction pretty quickly, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just saying that, like, what the science is telling us to do is, in the terms of American politics, quite radical.
Yeah, but you have to. I accept that. But one of the things in the Green New Deal, and I accept the findings of the Green New Deal completely. I accept it completely. But when you're actually talking about a proposal that will work and galvanize the American people, you can't go to the Denver City Council and say, we're going to retrofit every single building in the next 10 years. I mean, you can say that, but it's never going to happen, and everybody there knows it's not going to happen. So why wouldn't we say we're going to do it over a period of time where we actually believe we can get it done? And there's some folks who say, well, we put it out here in 10 years because then we'll compromise somewhere else later. And my only point about that is you got to win these races. I'm a broken drum, but we got to win these races. The reason I believe that is I know how hard it is to win one in a purple state.
Yeah.
Not compromising on the science, but understanding that, and by the way, Denver, just so you know, it's not like we just like legalized magic mushrooms in Denver. It's not like this is some incredibly conservative place.
Right.
I would say decriminalized, not legalized.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Hi there, Senator. My name is Joe LaPasada. I'm a graduate student here at Georgetown studying democracy and governance. And my question is, you've proposed, and it's on your website, that the U.S. pursue carbon neutrality by 2050. By that point, the temperature for the globe will have risen over 5 degrees Celsius, the ice caps will have melted entirely, and my generation will be left to clean that up. Do you think that policy, given the current pace of climate change, is too conservative, too slow?
Well, what I say, I think, is that no later than that, and that is what we hear from the scientists about what we need to do to act. Obviously, the sooner we do it, the better. I agree with that. I believe that.
All right. Next question.
My name is Jaron Berman. I'm studying at the College University. I'm also from Colorado.
Where from?
Boulder.
Boulder.
So Senator Bennet, in a 2017 town hall, you said that you oppose a Colorado ban on fracking, arguing that cheap natural gas has helped the move away from coal and oil. Do you still believe the benefits outweigh the environmental concerns of fracking?
Well, I mentioned earlier my concerns about the Trump administration eviscerating the fugitive methane rule. I think that's really problematic in the context of our of the ability of natural gas to be a transition fuel. If we were regulating it the way it should be regulated, I do think it still has a role to play. And I don't want to say one thing in Boulder and one thing here. By the way, it's tougher to say that in Boulder than it is to say it here.
That it is.
But it's a reflection of how seriously I take the practical realities of the situation we're contending with.
But just to follow up on that, you know, one of the things that we've seen is that if you take away the recession in which emissions went down, and that was largely due to economic activity, natural gas has expanded. It has eaten into much of the coal market and has put a lot of coal out of business. That's been good. But overall, emissions keep going up, right? So if at some point the bridge has to end, the bridge of natural gas.
I don't disagree with that.
Yeah, but probably sooner rather than later.
I don't disagree with that at all, but I also appreciate the observation you just made, because there are people that don't make the observation that a massive amount of the coal displacement in this country has been the result of natural gas. So if you're going to take the position that you're not here necessarily, if one is going to take the position that the answer to our climate issues is banning, all fracking now, you have to contend with the lack of coal displacement that would have resulted, as and that's all. That's all I'm saying. It's not. I'm not carrying a brief for that industry. I'm not. I can see it in my own state.
But it's a big employer in your state. I mean, it's a big industry in your state.
It is. Yeah, but it's not. But so is renewables, and so is the POW people, and so are our farmers and ranchers. And I mean, look, my state. This is not. We are not in my state. We know climate change is real. We know humans are contributing to it, and we know we need to deal with it urgently. We believe that. In a state that's a third Republican, a third Democratic, and a third independent, we believe that. We just wish we had a national political system that could actually respond in a way that makes sense to us. That's all we wish, and we wish. That's what we wish. That's what we wish.
Hi, Senator. My name is Quinn Eben. I'm a freshman at Georgetown studying history.
Congratulations.
My question for you is, why did you vote for the Keystone Pipeline?
Thank you. I really appreciate the question. And the reason was that I thought that Mitch McConnell was very effectively weaponizing it as a tool in this debate to turn us into the party that's anti-jobs and anti-infrastructure, and to turn climate, people that want to deal with climate into people that want to destroy our economy. And I think there's a lot of evidence that he succeeded at doing that. There's a reason why McConnell was the one who kept putting the Keystone Pipeline on the floor of the Senate, not the Democrats. And that's something that I have said, and I will say it again. I would never want anybody in this room, or my own kids, or anybody I know, to be as malevolent and as cynical as Mitch McConnell. But I do believe it is long past time for us to be as strategic as Mitch McConnell, and I don't believe we were during the course of that debate. I realize I'm a minority in that position, but that's what I believe.
Wait, but
I wrote a chapter about it in my book. If you're really bored, you can read it.
Just to draw that out, I mean, so what I'm hearing from you is that the politics of it were awful, and it wasn't, and it was not, there was no strategic upside in a no vote.
It didn't matter for me. I mean, I wasn't thinking about it personally for me. I didn't want him tarring our movement with the idea that we were anti-jobs and anti-infrastructure and anti-whatever. Somebody once said to me, Michael, they'd agreed with me. They were, somebody who's a very, very prominent environmentalist in my state that I admire tremendously. And we had a conversation about it, and he agreed that it was symbolic, but that the symbolism was really important for galvanizing people around this issue. And he later wrote me and by the way, I realize I'm on the losing argument here, so I'm not trying to persuade anybody, but I'm just trying to make you understand.
Yeah.
And
I'm not persuaded, but continue.
I understand.
I'm just kidding. I'm just joking. That was a joke.
Like when he said earlier, let me be clear, what he meant was, you are not being clear. But he wrote me a note and he said, and I write this in my book, he said, what would Michael have, first of all, who gets to pick the symbols? The movement or the politicians? I think that's a great question. And probably the answer is a little bit of both, and whoever shows up, and that's probably right. And then the next question was, what would Michael have said about the lunch counters during the civil rights movement? To which I said, exactly, because the lunch counters brought the North into the civil rights movement. It wasn't just about galvanizing the people who were already, with us. It was about building a movement that overcame generations of segregation. And in the same way that every time Trump talks about Democrats are for open borders, my answer is we passed a 2013 immigration bill that had every single vote from every Democrat in the Senate that had $46 billion of border security in it, but it wasn't your stupid medieval wall. It was like 21st century border security. Imagine that. They could actually do what needs to be done. And so my view is that we have to look for symbols that build coalitions, that build momentum, that build political. It's not about compromising. It's not about being a wuss. It's not about being scared. It's not about being a moderate. It's not about any of that stuff. It's about knowing what it's going to take to not leave you guys with just a bunch of talking points and nothing to show for it. That's for me what it's all about. And so when I cast these votes and when I think about these things, I'm thinking about you and I'm thinking about the kids mostly in my old school district and whether we're serving them well or not. And I wish more of us thought about it that way.
Hi, my name is Amelia Avis. I'm a second-year master's student in environmental policy at the University of Maryland. And across the U.S., and particularly in Colorado, climate change has caused both catastrophic flooding in some places and sustained drought in others. It's expected that much of the country will face extreme water shortages in the next 5 years. So how will you use your executive powers to manage our water supply and prepare for those climate-induced droughts?
It is something that I deal with on a daily basis. Being from Colorado, it's something we worry about a lot. And I think our situation, though, in Colorado is different than it is in other parts of the country, where what you're dealing with are water quantity issues, and I think we're dealing with it okay in Colorado the way we are dealing with it now. But when I'm in Iowa, for example, where you're seeing the kind of flooding that is happening there because of the microbursts of rain that's washing away the riverbanks and therefore the topsoil into the Gulf of Mexico. This is the kind of thing that feeds into the notion we were talking about earlier about the kinds of conservation practices we want to put in place to make sure that our working lands are doing what they need to do on climate, and that our forest lands are doing what they need to do on climate.
The flooding aspect of this, to me, strikes me as one of the most acute, because I think there's a few ways we can go. Like, I can imagine America 30 years from now that's essentially just run by the Army Corps of Engineers.
I hope not.
Well, no, exactly. That's a dystopic vision.
Yeah.
If you've ever interacted with the, I mean, God bless the Army Corps, but
no.
that's a whole other.
No, because
that's
they got
another forum,
enough other stuff to do. That's why.
Well, but it is the case that, I mean, when you look at some of the flood insurance programs, when you look at the Corps, there is going to be a temptation. There's sort of a fork in the road. There's going to be a temptation, basically, to say, we're going to just keep subsidizing at higher and higher levels flood insurance on floodplains, which is what is politically expedient. When they tried to reform it, it lasted a year and got revoked, right? And we're going to spend billions and billions and billions of dollars through different programs to build, flood resilience, and that will go to areas that have the most sort of political capital, and not do anything on the fossil fuel extraction, right? I mean, there's a bad version of this you can see happening where we're only dealing with the resilience and the mitigation. And
you can see that happening already
across the aisle.
You can see it with the Republicans. You see it happening already, and we just can't let it happen. You're right. I mean, it's the same thing with guns. Like the second you're talking about guns, they're then all of a sudden talking about mental health. You know? I mean, this is look, I don't know how many political science students there are here, but you do well to watch McConnell's speeches on the floor in the morning. It's painful to watch, but if you do it for 2 or 3 weeks, you will be able to divine everything you need to know about his political strategy. And you will see the unbelievable opportunity we have, if we're smart and we're strategic about it, to overcome what he's done. And on the investment side of this, just to finish, one thing I wanted to mention, I didn't mention, just in case I get hit by a bus on the way out of here, you guys will at least know this. When they say we don't have any money, or by the way, sorry for all the debt we're racking up after we called Barack Obama a Bolshevik and a socialist, but there's no money to make the investments in mitigation, other things that we need to do, or for Puerto Rico, or whatever the list is. Consider these two facts. Since 2001, the United States of America has borrowed $5 trillion from the Chinese for the privilege of giving rich people tax cuts, making our income inequality worse than it would have otherwise been. We have borrowed $5.6 trillion from the Chinese for the privilege of fighting wars that have lasted almost 20 years, longer than some of the people here have been alive. That 12 or 13 trillion dollars could have been invested in America, and none of it was. So when you think about a vision for what this country could look like if we were not going down the path of least resistance, not doing the thing that was easiest for politicians to do in the middle of the night, but making hard choices together, we have a lot of room to run in this country. And there is a hell of a lot that we can do together if we are engaged between now and next November, and we make sure that we don't take any of it for granted. People ask me, young people, they say, young people aren't motivated. What are you going to do to motivate young people? And the number one issue, I think, is climate. That's the number one motivator. And the number one thing you guys can do is get people who are not registered to register to vote, and get people who are registered to vote to actually vote. I'm not even going to ask you to get anybody who's not your age to do that. Just the people in your age. And we know we will win this election, and we can take the Senate back from McConnell.
All right, Senator Michael Bennet of Colorado,
Thank
you very much.
Thank you.
That was great.
Thanks a lot.
We're going to take a short break. Ali Velshi will be out with Andrew Yang momentarily. We'll see you in a little bit.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.